Welcome to this edition of the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Steve Ward, along with Annie Mercer and Susy Bastille. On the High Strangeness Factor, we explore all aspects of the paranormal and the unexplained, with an emphasis on the underlying connections between UFOs, cryptids, and all manner of psychic phenomena. Andy and Susy, welcome back. We're hoping to get, I got a guest here, another guest. This is Rosie, by the way. One of four cats. I'm a cat dad. So hopefully guest co-host Brandy will return, but we've had some audio problems. Okay. So quickly, what's Susy, tell us about your website and where people can reach you.
The website is puckwudgies.blogspot.com, and my YouTube is the Puckwudgie Whisperer. My blog is currently the only place you can reach me, except for Blue Sky, because I've gone into stealth mode to work on some top secret projects.
But we'll hear about the top secret projects at an opportune time.
You will be the second people to know.
Okay, very good. And Andy, you are a publisher. Is that not true?
I am indeed, and it's been quite a day for me today. The next book I am publishing was delivered from the printers today, so I spent the entire day unpacking 14 boxes of books and putting them on the storage shelf, ready to launch it properly at the weekend. So it's going to be an interesting, busy time in the next couple of months as that book hopefully sells out. And
where is it you live in the UK?
I'm in the West Country, in Somerset, as we'd call it for around locals around here. I moved away from near London about 2 years ago to set up the publishing business, having been a psychotherapist for about 20 years, and thought I've had enough of that now. I want to take a break from it. So enjoying life in the countryside. It's quieter here, although unfortunately they're about to build some houses in the field behind us, which is a bit of a shame. So it could be a bit of a noisy summer, unfortunately, but otherwise it's much better than what I used to, if I have to say.
I always think it sounds like one of those British murder mysteries where it's just a quiet little town and then all kinds of mayhem breaks loose.
You watch Midsummer Murders too many times.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well let's introduce our guest.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Hatem has a BA in film production from the University of Southern California's School of Cinema and Television. He has written screenplays including Under Siege 2, Dark Territory, and The Mothman Prophecies. He co-created the ABC television series Miracles and The Gates. He executive produced the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries event The Lost Room. He has written and produced episodes of Supernatural, Grimm, The Dead Zone, Witches of East End, Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, Damien, Dead of Summer, Second Chance, and No Tomorrow. He's also the creator and host of the hit audio boom podcast, Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf. Richard Hatem lives in Pasadena, California with his family. Richard, welcome to the High Strangeness Factor. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Very good. Where to start here? I've got a million questions, but I guess I wonder, how is it that you found your way or stumbled your way or pushed your way into being a producer and screenwriter?
Oh, yes, pushed my way pretty much. That's how you do it. I was interested in television writing from the time I was in high school. I'm 58, so when I was in high school, there was this new TV show called The A-Team.
Oh, yes.
And it was at a time I was a junior in high school, and it was sort of a time in my life when I was beginning to realize, people write television, and I recognized the name of the guy, Stephen J. Cannell, because he also wrote and produced one of my favorite shows, The Rockford Files.
Oh, yes.
And I began to put this together, so he did The Rockford Files and The Greatest American Hero, and now he's doing The A-Team, and I was like, this is the greatest thing ever, because it was like action stuff, but it was funny, because a lot of action stuff at that time wasn't funny. It was pretty melodramatic. And when you're James Garner and you're able to be funny when you're scared, and guys are trying to kill you and you're still cool. I mean, what more can you be to a 16-year-old boy? That was like, oh, I would tell I would go to my parents and I'm like, I'm either going to be an actor or a TV writer or a private detective. Those were top 3. And a 2 out of 3 ain't bad, and I've still got time if I really want to hang out a shingle and start taking on cases.
And poor Jim Rockford, every time he had a knock on his door of his trailer, I'm saying, don't open the door because there's always a couple thugs there to beat the crap out of him.
Oh my God. I know. It's like, it is funny to look back at it and go, wow, you lived in a trailer and you had guys shooting at you. Like, that is scary. So by the way, now I don't know if you guys have ever been to Los Angeles, but where his trailer is a place that is called Paradise Cove.
Okay.
And you can go there. And the restaurant that he would go to that was right across the parking lot from him is still there. It's different now. It's a little bit, higher end. And it's been re-landscaped. But you can go there, and as I often do, and sort of go, okay, so his trailer was pretty much like right here. And then in that one episode when he was bringing in his groceries and he got punched, probably happened right around here. It's the greatest.
And also, if you had any of the shots of it where you're kind of looking back at it, there were no power cables going in for power, for lights or for phone or anything like that.
Hey, yeah, I never thought of that. You're right. And it's so funny because, I mean, I'm sure you guys know, but it is one of those things where the interior of the trailer was in, Burbank on a studio lot. And then the outside was in Malibu. So they'd be in Malibu and he'd walk into the trailer and then they'd cut it together with scenes they shot the next day or 4 days later.
And I was the weasel that would always, when they would open the door, I'd look back there to see the painted background or the photograph of the fake background, But so it's like one part of my brain is analyzing it like, okay, it's in the studio or whatever. But the other part of my brain is saying, it's a TV show. Just enjoy the damn thing,
Well, to me, that was the golden age of television because they didn't spend. Here's the difference, as far as I can tell, because I didn't work in television in the 70s or the 80s, but in the, I guess, early 2000s is when I got into it. And by then, they were lighting every television show like a movie. And it took an incredibly long time. And I'm like, how did they even make these Rockford Files episodes? And it's like, oh, that's right. They didn't light anything. When I say they didn't light it, they lit it a lot. They were just like, throw light on it and let the actors do their thing. And in a way that was better. Just make a show that's about the script and the acting. And don't worry so much that every frame has to be, a Martin Scorsese movie. Just look in the Rockford Files, dialogue and acting, that did just fine. And they spent their time on car chases.
That's right. Great car chases. And the guy that played his father, Rocky, his name is escaping.
Noah Beery.
What a perfect casting job. I mean, you believed that he was Jim Rockford's father.
Totally. And what a lovable actor. I mean,
exactly.
And what's funny is if you watch early on, I think in the first episode or two, it's a different actor.
Right. The pilot was a different guy.
I know. Isn't that weird? You're like, who's that guy? Get out of here.
Yeah. You're not Rockford's dad, for crying out loud.
Who are you? I don't know who you are. Get out.
Andy, did you ever see the Rockford Files over there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember it when I was younger. My parents used to watch it. So, yes, I definitely remember that.
What about you, Susie?
You're a mere child, grown-ups my age.
Susie, what about you? Reruns? Rockford Files? James Garner?
I've never heard of it.
Oh, no. No, this is great. No, Susie, this is great because you're the only one here who has all of the Rockford Files ahead of you.
Yes.
I am telling you, I don't know if you're familiar with who James Garner is, but I'll put in the chat a couple of episodes that you can watch and you will go, oh, this is a new thing that I can go watch. You'll love it.
I've disappointed people before, but I'll give it a shot for you.
Funny enough, I'm watching, my wife and I are watching the TV series Castle, the detective thing set in
Oh,
New York. Yeah.
yes.
And Steve Watson was actually in that, playing cards in a few episodes. So, yes.
How great is that? And like,
What
who's
was
in
that,
on
Andy?
that joke?
I missed that.
Show called
go ahead,
Castle. It's a New York-based detective comedy kind of thing.
Oh, okay.
Castle's a writer, and he's with Kate Beckett's the detective, and they're solving sort of crimes together and solving the murder of her mother. Ultimately, it's a very good show. We've seen it a few times, but in some of the early episodes, my brain's dying on me. Steve Carell, is it his name?
Stephen J. Cannell.
Yes,
right,
sorry,
right.
yes. He's playing cards with Castle, because Castle's supposed to be this writer, and James Patterson's there as well, and another chap. They sort of play cards together. So we're talking about sort of detective stuff.
It's a whole deal. It's an inside joke. The idea that Castle is a novelist of mysteries, and then so he plays poker with these other guys who actually in real life not only write mysteries but are big hams and dying to get on. I mean, Cannell was dying to get on camera. I mean, even at the end of his shows, he was pulling the typing paper out of his thing, and was waving through the air and turning into the logo. And yeah, he loved doing that. And I didn't know he was even a part of that until long after that show. I'm like, wait, what? Yeah. I had no idea, because it wasn't a show I caught when it was on. Right, but I mean, that in a way, that's an old-fashioned kind of show. It's sort of kind of like Remington Steele or Moonlighting.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the old sort of male-female romantic comedy, screwball comedy, but there's a crime at the center. Is there anything more entertaining?
No,
and also, Richard, Andy, with all his other irons in the fire, is actually writing a murder mystery.
Yes, I am. I've been for about 10 years now.
It's like my paranormal book, another decade or so.
Well, in the space of starting that, I've actually written 6 books to do with something to do with the occult and witchcraft, and they've been written and completed. Well, this novel I've been working on for years. I started off being set in America, I have to say. That was the idea. It was set in New York, because I've been to New York quite a few times. And most people read it and thought, that's good. But one person who was a writer, who Steve gave it to, said, "No, you can tell you're English. You tell you're British. You're not American." It's like, oh, okay. So you're actually rewriting it, set it in London instead. And it's working, actually. I must admit, it's slow progress, but it's working. I have to rewrite all the backstories of the characters, which is annoying.
Well, it's funny because one of the biggest writers today is Lee Child.
Oh, yeah.
British, writing in the American idiom. I mean, I don't know. I bet with a couple different, words, just swap out bonnet for something.
I did all those words correctly. Yeah. I think it was just the tone. I think your friend says, Steve, it was the tone. There was a certain style to it. The words are correct, but the style didn't seem to quite work.
As long as you're not calling flashlights a torch, I think you're home free.
And sidewalks, not pavements, and pants, not trousers. Yeah, we've been through that before, haven't we?
Oh, and no prams, by the way. No prams.
Yeah.
Huh, I'm fascinated. Andy, also, I mean, nothing. Look, as an American. Oh, wait. So are Susy and Steve. Frankly, nothing would be more charming than a book about the Englishman in New York. Frankly, I mean, we'd read that all day and night. That's something you might want to. It's like you get the best of both worlds.
So I have to ask. So how did you get around to where they're actually paying you, Richard?
Well, it took a long time. Here's the thing, though. I'm a maniac. So I started when I was in high school. When I was a junior in high school, I wrote my first television script, and it was an episode of the A-Team. And I just sort of felt like, well, I know this show. I love this show. And if I can just spend more time in that world by writing a script, then I'm going to do it. But I was also like, I want to sell something. I want to start my career. I'm enough of this school bullshit. I'm not going to be one of these dudes. Whatever life is going to hand me, I will never be the dude who graduates college and is like, I wonder what I'm going to do. I'm like, I know what I want to do. This is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. And if I sell it, I'll drop out of high school. I'll start my TV writing career right away. Well, that didn't happen. but I wrote 3 A-Team scripts. I wrote a Hardcastle and McCormick. I wrote a Riptide. I wrote a Remington Steele, Equalizer. I wrote Cheers, Family Ties, Newhart. I was just writing scripts, and the whole thing was, can I beat the clock? Can I sell something before college graduation? So I graduated high school, went to USC, eventually went to USC Film School. But the whole time I'm like, if I can just get out of this quick and move into my career in TV writing, and of course graduated college and nothing. I mean, I was worse than nothing. College destroyed every bit of confidence I had in anything. USC Film School, I do not recommend.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Anyway, and it was not until after college graduation, after my best friend Matt Reeves, who is now a hugely successful director and writer, we sat down to write a movie. And about 5 years or so after we graduated college, we sold it. And that was Dark Territory, which became Under Siege 2, Dark Territory.
That was a great movie. It was a worthy sequel. I mean, everybody loves the first one, right? It was excellent.
Well, what's funny about it was when we were writing it, like, we were totally influenced by Die Hard. And by the way, in film school, they tell you, don't do this. Don't just take some big hit. Don't try to write Star Wars again. No one wants that. Write your own personal story about, the summers you spent on your grandfather's farm.
Hold on just a second, Richard. Do you know what Under Siege was?
No.
Susy, with Steven Seagal, big action flick on a ship.
No.
Okay. Well, this was a sequel.
No, she doesn't
He
over in
he
this.
wrote a great screenplay to a sequel for a movie. You have no idea what it was.
I've seen it, at least, yes.
It's starring then and future fascist Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
And it was but what I was going to say was, the joke is that Matt and I loved Die Hard so much. And we were like, what if we could write a movie like that? And then we're like, well, let's do it. Let's just write Die Hard on a train. Let's write Die Hard at 100 miles an hour. That'll be great. So, we're 23. It's like, let's do it. So that's what we wrote. But of course, when it's me and Matt, and especially Matt, it's like, we're not just on a lark. We're building a machine. Like, this screenplay that we write is going to be structured as good, if not better, than Die Hard. We're going to have planting. We're going to have payoff. We're going to have these, intricately designed action sequences that work like Rube Goldberg's. Action as contraption was our buzzword. And we just wrote the living hell out of this thing. And all along, we kept saying, God, it'd be so good if they could make this into Die Hard 2. That would be the great, or get Harrison Ford, It's like, all we knew is that what we didn't want it to be was like a Schwarzenegger movie. Because we like Schwarzenegger, but we're like, those movies are different. Those movies are always like, 20 terrorists who picked the wrong train to hijack. We're like, no, it's got to be like Die Hard. It's got to be like a guy, he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's hanging on by his fingernails for 2.5 hours, and that's the movie. And just barely, and we love that because that's great. So that's what we wrote. And then it's sold to Warner Brothers, and they're like, we're making Under Siege 2. And we're like,
Good
no.
deal. Now, was a young Catherine Heigl in that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
A young Morris Chestnut,
Okay.
a young Eric Bogosian.
Okay. And I'm a huge film soundtrack freak. Basil Podouros did the soundtrack. He is so, man, to score him for the soundtrack was amazing.
You're so right, Steve. I'm so glad you said that. What a giant talent to be working on that movie, which was our feeling about a lot of people. We were very lucky. We didn't at the time. We were a little ambivalent. It's like, oh God, our first step into the professional world, and it's a Steven Seagal movie, you know? It's like, I don't know. It's like, is this going to ruin our careers? And, but it's so funny because in the years that have passed, it has, I don't know. It's like, I would tell people, like, I'll go somewhere and I'll be in a cab or something, and you know, or anywhere. And someone, so what do you do? You know, oh, I write movies. Oh, what'd you write? Oh, Under Siege 2. I love that movie. And then the next sentence, universal. They always say, me and my dad loved that movie. We always watch it. And I'm like, wow. And after the fifth or sixth time, I'm like, this is funny. This is like some weird Father's Day bonding ritual of manhood. Somebody's to watch a Steven Seagal movie, but everyone has really like sweet memories of this movie. And I'm like, you know what? That's awesome. I'm glad. I'm glad it's turned into something that isn't like, oh, that piece of shit is so terrible. It's like, you know what? It's a goofy movie, but it's cool. And I'm just like, thank God people are generous.
That's very good.
Well, I think Susie knows what she's watching at the weekend.
Yeah, Susie's got a big weekend coming up.
I'm taking notes over here.
Yeah, it's binging Rockford and checking out Under Siege 2. You can skip the first one, Susie. It's not that good.
I was just going to ask if I would be able to follow along if I don't see the first one.
Here's the thing. Even if you do see the first one, you won't be able to follow along.
Well, now I'm intrigued.
It was some of the same people that produced Under Siege, I think, were involved with the Fugitive film. I'm not sure if some of the people behind it, certainly some of the actors that were in it were. I'm talking about the one with Harrison Ford.
In the future, I'm casting back to find where the links are. What are you thinking of?
I'm thinking. I thought that maybe was it the director or producer or whatever that was involved in Under Siege and was the Fugitive.
I'm sorry. Yes, not Under Siege 2, but
not
Davis,
2. I mean the first one. Yeah.
Andrew Davis directed Under Siege and then went on to direct The Fugitive. Which The Fugitive is a wonderful movie. I've gone back to that one a few times, and that's, you know, I mean, these are weirdly character-driven movies,
right?
In a way, I don't know if there's a ton of examples, you know, in the last 20 years of like that action movie was great because of the conception of the main character and placing them. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm overlooking some.
No, I think that's right. And as a huge fan of the original TV series, still my favorite TV series of all time with David Jansen, I was kind of wondering, what are they going to do to my TV show, making this movie? You know, because sometimes movies, I mean, you can look at certain TV series and they made the movie and it's like, okay, we need to bury that movie in a shallow grave. But with The Fugitive, it paid tribute to the series. There were a lot of minor details they brought forward and paid tribute to. And with the relationship between Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones and all the supporting cast was phenomenal.
So you signed off. You were like, yes.
I was
stamp of approval.
I think it's the, of any that I've seen, it's the best translation from TV show into film that's ever been done. Now I haven't seen everything, but.
Well, wasn't the concept of the television show even based on Les Miserables?
Yes. Well, the Roy Huggins, his original genesis was he wanted to have somebody moving from town to town in a contemporary setting, but he didn't want a drifter. He wanted something to drive him. Why is he moving from town to town? And he came up with the idea that he's falsely convicted of a crime and has to stay ahead of the law, and to find this guy that really murdered his wife. So, but then the teleplay writer, Leonard Stansmore, maybe, I can't remember his name, but he saw the relationship between Les Miserables and this situation. So Gerard was named after Javert. You know, that was not a coincidence. So yes, he saw here's this guy who is thrust into these situations where he helps people, but he is putting himself in jeopardy. Every week, this poor sap Dr. Richard Kimball is thrown into a situation where he's got to put his own safety in jeopardy to help somebody.
There were so many shows like this. There were, Kung Fu,
Yep.
The Incredible Hulk, Have Gun Will Travel.
Run for your life.
Yeah, that were just sort of like we will go to a new place every time, which is not easy for television. That is a real challenge because you have no standing sets. It's like if you're doing Dragnet, it's like, well, we're in
Right.
their Dragnet office. We can always go back there. Most TV shows depend on repeatable sets that they can build and then amortize the cost over however many episodes. It's very difficult to do a show where you're really trying to pull off, no, every week we're in a new town, a new place. You shoot in Southern California, you can do it for a while.
Right.
You just got to make sure you got a really good production designer. But it's tricky, but it's funny how many there were. There were a lot of them.
And Richard, I was the guy that when he was supposed to be in Michigan or wherever, I'd be looking in the background to see that palm tree that they didn't cover up or they didn't shoot just right. Say, hey, you're in California. You can't fool me, man. But it didn't matter. And again, the music, Peter Ruggolo did the basic score for The Fugitive. And then they used something called the CBS Library of Music, where they used music from Jerry Goldsmith, Bernard Herrmann, that they had originally composed for things like the Twilight Zone and so forth. So as a kid, I had a real ear for music. I couldn't compose one note of music, but I was very attuned to the music they were using in these shows.
That's so funny. I didn't know that. I mean, again, for TV production at the time, it makes perfect sense that they would repurpose music they already owned.
Oh, sure.
Which is a wise financial choice. But
and
that's
so much of it
amazing.
fit it like a
picked
glove.
up on it.
Yeah. And so I even tuned into the music when I was a kid, before I actually was very aware of composers and who they were. And then later on, I figured out, oh, that's the same guy,
Well, what
so
other shows were you like? I'm trying to think of what other shows were sort of character. I mean, the Stephen Cannell shows were all Mike Post and Pete Carpenter, and they had their sound. I'm just trying to think. Oh, Lalo Schifrin. You probably had a lot of Lalo and Henry Mancini for the Sunday Night Mystery Movie, right?
Oh, sure. But in the I didn't really realize that The Fugitive had used all that music until they put up a whole bunch of Twilight Zone music out on LPs originally, like maybe 6 of them. So I'm listening to these and I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute, that's Fugitive music. Jerry Goldsmith, Bernard Herrmann, Fred Steiner, Nathan Van Cleve, and on and on. Yes,
Van Cleve, total Twilight Zone. I've been rewatching the Twilight Zone, and I see Van Cleve all the time.
Well, he did maybe they would all do anywhere from 4 to 6 to whatever shows, and then they would become stock music for the TV show.
Yeah. And I do recognize cues being reused. It's funny that they didn't necessarily, like Bernard Herrmann did some, like they sort of rotated their composers.
Right.
That's so cool.
Boy, I could go on till midnight with this. Well, midnight for you and for me, but I guess maybe we should.
It's like, hey, you're talking about 6 a.m. Let's wrap this up.
Maybe we should move ahead a little bit to, I listen. Oh, what's the name of your podcast, by the way?
Oh, Richard Hatem's Paranormal Bookshelf.
Okay, I listened.
So everybody write that down.
I put it up on my Facebook page. So there's look for your logo and the link. I listened to the episode of Gray Barker's "They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers." And ladies and gentlemen, you've got to listen to that one. Not only does Richard talk about this amazing book by Gray Barker, and I have some things to say about that, about the Men in Black that was published way back in the 50s. I actually met Barker for a few minutes. I'll tell you about that later. But Richard gets into the torture you went through, and when you were starting to have the concept for the Mothman Prophecies film. And here's one thing I did not realize. I had this vision that that the powers that be came to you and said, Richard, we need you to write a screenplay for the Mothman Prophecies. That's not what happened at all. Please tell us how that unfolded.
Yeah, the Mothman Prophecies was on no one's radar. This was not something anybody wanted, which was cool to me. I mean, that's what made it cool, was that okay, so at that time I had there's a lot going on, but let's start at the point where, of course, I'd spent my life reading books about people who had seen UFOs and Bigfoot and ghosts, and I was very sort of I was at that age, I was kind of obsessed with the notion of people having these transcendent experiences of, well, high strangeness. And I was like, that's always been an interest of mine. There should be a way to write a movie about it. But every movie is sort of so elevated. Like, I love Poltergeist. I love that movie. But it's not about a poltergeist.
No.
And The Changeling with George C. Scott has some really cool kind of realistic, parapsychological stuff going on, but at a certain point it just becomes a murder mystery. It's just like, who's the kid? What are these bones we found in the basement? We need to solve the crime. And I'm like, that's the problem. All these movies start out with all these really intriguing questions, but then they have to answer them. But in real life, those questions never get answered. And I was like, isn't there a way to tell a movie that reflects that somehow? But I'm like, well, I don't know how to do that, because how do you do a movie that does not have an ending? You just have a middle. It's like, well, we tried everything we could to figure it out, and we couldn't. Good night, everybody.
And that was the Mothman Prophecies, the book.
Right. Okay. So then, as all this is sort of boiling through my mind for a few months, I go to a bookstore in Los Angeles on a Sunday. We're hanging out with friends on the West Side, and it's a place called the Bodhi Tree, which is no longer there, but it was a new age bookstore in an old rambling house at the very end of Melrose Avenue. And I'm wandering around, and Illuminate had come out with their reprint of the Mothman Prophecies with the Frank Frazetta painting on the cover, right? So I'm like, what is this? And it's vaguely, I'm like, Mothman, I think I've heard of. So I pull the book out, I read the back, and by the time I'm done reading the back of the book, I'm like, this is a movie, and this is my movie. I buy the book, and of course, when you get that feeling, you're like, oh God, please let this instinct be correct. Don't let me start reading this book and 20 pages in, go, this is ridiculous. So I buy the book, read it, don't know John Keel from anybody. I read the book, and it is like the top of my head came off. I've never read anything like it. And the fact that it began to involve him, I'm like, I've never read a book about the supernatural where it's the author suddenly is the focus of the phenomenon. Like, this is insane. I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. There's no story here. It's all over the place. There's a million things going on. I don't know what I'm going to do, but this is it. So yeah, so I got in touch through my agent, got in touch with John Keel, who had a bad experience. He had, when I spoke to him, he's like, you're not the first one to try to make this movie. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, 10, 15 years ago, I got a call from my lawyer that they were making the movie. Someone was just making the movie. They'd never come to me for the rights to my book. It was what is it called? Sun Classic International or something.
Oh, God.
It was the people who made In Search of Noah's Ark. And
Oh no.
those guys. And I love those movies, but they were pretty shady.
Yeah.
Their whole operation. And so Keel's lawyer, a man with the deathless name of Knox Burger, shut them down. And when you've been shut down by Knox Burger, you've been shut down. So we shut them down. So he was just like, well, thanks at least for calling me up. And I'm like, no, I love your book. I want to try to do this. And I can't do the whole book, but I love this sort of the whole philosophical approach of, when you get into these areas, you may never get out. And that was part of his story also, obviously. So he was like, oh, well, okay. So we wrote him a check for a 1-year option, I think. And an option deal allows me to sort of go into meetings at the various Hollywood studios and say, hi, here's the book. Here's me. Here's the movie I want to write. Would you pay me money to write it? So that was the plan. But my problem was I was a writer, not a salesman. And I'm like, I don't really know if I can do this. So I've really got to figure this out. So I ended up spending months writing notes for a pitch. And then I had a 40-page outline. So I called up my agent and I'm like, because he's like, are you ready to pitch this thing yet? I'm like, well, I've got an outline. Can I come read it to you? And I don't know why I needed to read it to him, but I couldn't just give it to, I'm like, I need to read it. Can you just block out an hour? Let me read it to you. He's like, okay. So I drive out to, again, Century City. I go up into my agent's office and I'm like, okay, sit down, lock your door, turn off your phone. Here we go. Fade in. And I start reading him an outline, which is basically the movie. And, and I keep looking up at him. He's like, yeah, I'm listening. And when I finish, he's like, well, how long would it take you to just write the script? And I'm like, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks. He's like, then just go write it. Just go write it. We'll sell it as a script. You'll make more money anyway. So I'm like, okay. So then I went, wrote the script, gave it to him. He read it. He's like, this is the best spec script I've ever read. This is going to sell for $1 million. So if you're an agent, never say to your client, this is going to sell for $1 million. You're setting the bar too high. He sends it out. It sells for $0 to nobody. The script it goes all over town. Everyone, Ron Howard reads it, Ron Howard's like, I can't make this movie. It's a tweener. It's like, what's it? It's in between. It's not horror. It's not something that's a tweener. I'm like, okay. There are people who are upset. They're like, well, this is great, but like at the end, shouldn't he fight the Mothman on the bridge?
Oh dear.
And I'm just like, no, that's just not what this movie is. So it's like, okay, you know what? It didn't sell. I'm happy with what I did. I'm proud of the thing, but I don't want someone making a shitty version of it. So it's like, okay, it didn't sell. Fine. Didn't sell. Then one of the producers on Under Siege 2, a guy named Gary Goldstein, calls me up and he's like, hey, so I hear you went around town with a script. Oh, what happened? I'm like, I went around, it didn't sell. He's like, can I read it? I'm like, sure. He reads it. He says, this is really great. And he's a producer, a creative producer. So he says, let me ask you a question. Did you take it to here? Did you take it to here? Did you show it to this guy at this company? Did you show it to this guy at this company? These are his connections. One of them was Lakeshore. And my agent and I are like, no, those 3 or 4 places we didn't go to. He's like, would you allow me to walk it in? Walking it in means that he goes in with the script and says, I've worked with Richard. This is a great script. I'm bringing it to you. If it sells, I am one of the producers, simply for bringing it to your attention, which is totally legit. So he brought it around and Lakeshore read it and called me up and said, we'd like to have a meeting with you. So I'm like, wow, okay. Well, maybe there's this, the heartbeat has come back. The near-death experience has ended. So I go to the meeting at Lakeshore and it's the worst meeting I've ever had. It's like literally everything they're saying. I'm like, no, not really. It's actually this. And they're like, huh? And they're like, well, what we really loved was that you did this. I'm like, oh, that's not what I did. I was actually trying to do this other thing. And they're like, huh. I walk out. Listen, usually I walk out thinking it's been the greatest meeting ever and there's no way it can't sell. I called up my agent. I'm like, this was bad. This was a bad meeting. So let's just move on. 2 days later, he calls me up. Lakeshore wants it. And I'm like, what? This is insane. He's like, no. They really love it. They apologize for they know the meeting was weird, but they actually love it. They get it. They do know what it is, and they want to buy it. Now they're not going to pay you much. They're just going to pay you a little. But I think you should do it. And I'm like, well, why? He's like, here's the thing about Lakeshore. They have no money. Everything they buy, they make. They have to. That's their financial model. They have no choice. They can't buy 100 things and then discard 90 of them. If they buy 5 things, they make those 5 things. He said, if they buy your script, they will make it. And I'm like, you know what? Okay, I'll believe you. What else am I going to do? So, and sure enough, they bought it. They understood it. They got it to Mark Pellington. They got it to Richard Gere, and the movie got made. And it was what I wrote. I mean, that movie is what I wrote, which is, that never happens, especially when it's something a little offbeat. I won the movie lottery with Mark Pellington, Richard Gere, the whole deal. I was the luckiest screenwriter in the world.
You really did. And I have to tell you, your presence is felt at the Mothman Museum because we have 5 documentaries going at the same time, including the Mothman Legacy. Now, I'm very humble to say this, but I'm also in that as a talking head. So I know when you show up on the Mothman Legacy, Richard Hatem, screenwriter of the Mothman Prophecies, I'm soon to follow. So I'll just kind of hang around and I'll point to get to somebody's attention back there and say, hey, look at that guy. He's strikingly handsome, but he's so full of himself, Anyway, so but honestly, and we're all the way in the back, but the Mothman Legacy keeps cranking along. And what reminded me, you're in there saying that you had, when you first got into this, you wanted to solve the mystery of the paranormal. And then it's like hitting, tell us what you came up against when you really thought you were going to solve the mystery.
Well, I don't remember what I said in that documentary. It's so funny that there's a documentary playing in a store in a place I've never been. People walk through, they see my face. I don't know I'm so excited to go. And by the way, if you're within the sound of my voice, this is the year I will finally be at the Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant.
That'll be awesome.
I can't wait to see you there, Steve. But anyway, I think I'm like everybody. I think a lot of people kind of go through their life. They're aware of UFOs and stuff, especially with UFOs. I think UFOs is sort of the classic experience of people going, okay, wait, I'm hearing a siren. Is everyone okay?
Yeah, not here.
I think that was my siren over here.
Is that your ride?
I'm right on what it was Vian Street, which is Route 62, where the Scarberries and the Mallets fled the Mothman from the TNT area. So there's fire station. My cats, they're used to it by now, but that's probably just normal traffic over here.
It's killing me that you're right there, but I'll be there soon. But anyway, I think what people tend to do is something will happen, a project will come along, or they'll decide to write an article or do a podcast or something. And then they're like, you know what? I'm finally going to really take a look at this UFO thing. And they get a handful of books and they start reading them. And I think there's these stages you go through, and I think everyone goes through them of, I'm going to read I am a reasonable person. I'm not a believer. I'm not a skeptic. I am willing to be, I want to hear some arguments. And you get some books and you read the books, and the books are fascinating and they run the gamut now, of course. But they always end with well, that's not the full answer. These people are sort of we think we know, but then you read another one and then you're huh. And then you keep reading. And then you get to a point of well, but wait a second. Then you get into the weird stuff. Then you get into the Whitley Strieber and the John Keel. Because you're oh, maybe I have to, I got to stop reading the Nick Pope and all the government stuff. And I got to, let me let me see if I can't find out what those. Then you read that stuff, and then your head really explodes, and you're like, none of this stuff is making sense. And then you begin to sense that there's two camps. You know, you've got the ETHers and then the other, and it's like okay, one side thinks physical biological aliens and visiting Earth and crashing their discs, and the government's got them, and they're reverse engineering this, and they're doing an autopsy on that, and they've made a treaty, and there's a deal, and we're going to let them abduct people, and this whole like, what? And then on the other side, it's just people going, I had an experience, and it's not totally physical. I mean, you really get into sort of the psychic element of what these encounters are like, and they're not purely physical. And that's why it's so hard for the experiencers to articulate what they went through, because it's like, how do you describe a thing that you experience as physical, but then also partially not physical? It's like, I don't know how I got in. I don't know how I got out, but I know I was there and I had physical sensations, and it wasn't a dream, and I don't know what it was, and it scares the hell out of me. And then you're really up a tree. And you either go, you know what, maybe this UFO thing is best left to somebody else. I got a life. I got to go live it. See you later, folks. Or it becomes the question of your life. It becomes your thing. You don't golf. You don't play video games. You read about UFOs, and you don't do crossword puzzles. You don't do Sudoku. You read about UFOs, and you just go, "What?
I think we've all been there,
right?" It's like, there's got to be a way to connect all these dots. And I've got do you guys know Rob Christofferson with his Our Strange Skies podcast?
I do not. No.
Rob is a guy who lives in upstate New York, and he's like an autodidact. He remembers everything about every UFO case he's ever read. Probably about 40 years old, lives in a small town, but he knows, like, there's not a UFO encounter that he isn't like, oh, yes, that was in France in 1951, and let me tell you exactly what it was. He knows everything. So I go on his show, and I'm like, Rob, I've solved it. I've solved the alien abduction thing. I've got the answer. And then I give him my answer, and he's like, thank you. Finally, it's solved. but it's like, it's impossible. It's like, it literally is the perfect puzzle.
Yeah.
Let me do my station identification here. You are listening to the High Strangeness Factor, copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Today, Andy, Susy, and I are talking to Richard Hatem, the screenwriter of the Mothman Prophecies, about all kinds of good stuff. Now, I have to mention Brent Rains. Brent Rains is someone that never met John Keel, but he corresponded with him and talked to him on the phone many times. He has a Facebook page called Alternate Perceptions, and there was even a time when he published a magazine that you could hold in your hands and read the print and keep it in a box somewhere. But he wrote this great book called John Keel. Now, nobody can see this on the podcast, but John Keel, the Man, the Myths, and the Ongoing Mysteries. And in here, he's talking to Sandra Martin, who was the literary agent for John Keel. And she used to publish like self-help books and that sort of thing. But she loved people like Keel. She thought he was a great writer, and she wanted to help promote his stuff. She's the one that produced the Complete Guide to Mysterious Beings, which was a reprint of Strange Creatures from Time and Space, which had that other great Frank Frazetta painting on the cover. Anyway, he was complaining about the scripts that were coming. He says he would call me at my office to complain bitterly about how they were butchering my story. After a few years of this, he called and said, Sandra, I finally got a really good script for the Mothman Prophecies. And he said, well, let me preface this first. And he said, well, they've updated it. They've got him married and so forth. So he mentioned that. But he said they were, all these things were not true. But he said, but this particular screenplay was true to the heart of the story. They were true to the things that happened and didn't exaggerate. And he's talking about your screenplay, Richard. And she says, he was laughing on the phone. He was so happy. And so, I mean, this is such a change from. I imagine he was getting screenplays where they were turning Mothman into a monster or something like that. But so that that was really cool. He loved your screenplay, and also I heard him back then. He had done very few interviews. So when the film was coming out, he was actually on Coast to Coast AM, and this is back when Art Bell was still at the helm, right? And now Art Bell didn't know anything about Mothman. I'm thinking, what is the matter with you? And there were other people that didn't know. There was one guy that was promoting some kind of a event, and John Keel might be there, and he's saying, I'm sorry, this is a UFO guy that's been around a while, but I don't remember his name. And I'm going, this is sacrilege. You guys, so Keel was being, back then, Keel was being forgotten, and a lot of his stuff was not in print anymore. That's all changed. But so anyway, Art Bell asked him outright. He said, well, what did you think of the movie? He said, and you know how Keel taught, very kind of soft-spoken. He says, well, I like the movie. And he said, the thing it really captured was the paranoia I felt at that time. And we've all read the Mothman Prophecies. If you remember the chapter called Paranoiacs Are Made, Not Born, that really brings it home. So, well, you hit a home run with John Keel, that's for sure.
Hearing stuff like that is so great. I should get Brent's book. I unfortunately have not read it yet. I would love to see it. It was an odd thing. Okay, so I read the book, and I really felt like, well, this is really something like this, but I know that no one really knows what this is. So in a way that was good. I was sort of like, I can be the person bringing this in. It's not Harry Potter. I can walk in. No one else has got this. But I'm like, this guy is onto something. And then of course you read the book and you're like, this guy's a living legend. I want to talk to him. And so I wanted to impress him. I wanted him to be, I wanted him to like what I did. I wanted there to be this connection like you do. Like if I was adapting a Stephen King novel, it would be like, well, I want to write it, but do I get to meet him? Can I have coffee with Stephen King? Can I tell him why my whole career is based on him, please? That's what it felt like. And so we talked, and he was a nice guy. I will tell you, when I sent him the script at first, the impression I got was that he was not all that thrilled. And I think it actually took him a minute, and the reality of the film, the fact that, it now has been purchased by a production company, and they're taking it seriously. And now they're actually going to get a movie star. And he was so thrilled that I think with Richard Gere, they've really captured the resemblance.
I remember him saying that, yeah, they got somebody, as ugly as Richard Gere to portray him. Of course, he was kidding, but he was really tickled about that.
So it's probably not as big of a deal as Keel approving of it, but this is the first movie we've talked about that I've actually seen.
but you haven't mentioned your opinion of it, but that's okay. So
you did try to ruin it with romance a little bit, but I'll forgive you for that because the rest was great.
Well, wait a minute.
Come on, Susie.
Tell Richard about the part that you wish had been put in the movie. And I don't even remember this part in the book.
No, so there is a part of the book that I seem to be the only one who noticed. There is, it's towards the beginning of the book, but he is talking about somebody standing on the riverbank, and they look across the river and they see a red orb and then a little person. I seem to be the only one that pays attention to that. I happen to research Pukwudgies and little people lore. And in the area which I live in, they are commonly spotted right after a red orb of light. And it's folklore that started pre-colonization, so going back hundreds and hundreds of years. So I read that part and I said, there was a Pukwudgie during the Mothman flap. And I don't think anyone has really ever mentioned it besides me. And no one ever seems to remember reading it either.
So I've heard of the Pukwudgie. I love the name. Can you tell me about the puck? Like what makes a Pukwudgie?
So it's an Algonquin word. They are commonly in the Northeast United States. They are little people, similar to, little people in other cultures, gnomes, dwarfs, fey creatures, small mischievous creatures. Pukwudgies are what they're called in this area, but they're, you have little people lore in every single culture throughout the world. It is, as far as we can tell, one of the oldest kind of folklore stories, creatures.
And then so the red orb is, because not people, I don't think there's a ton of people who know a ton about Pukwudgies off the top of their head. So is that an associated phenomenon?
Yeah, so here they're called Taipei-Wonkas. Back in England, they're called will-o'-the-wisps, I believe. But they're very, it's in this area, they are spotted first, and they will kind of float along and bring you to the creature. So you kind of want to follow them to see what's going on, and they kind of draw you in.
It is funny how often light or some sort of light phenomenon is associated. It's fucking one of these things that makes me feel like, God, the answer's just right in front of us, and we're just, it's got something to do with light. Recently, and I think I talked about this on one of the more recent podcasts, a couple things, but the amount of phenomenon that involve electricity.
Yes. Yep.
And people talking about electricity, and it's like, what is that the ultimate nature of everything, of the not our physical incarnation, but sort of the world of consciousness? Is electricity the terra firma, if you will, that it exists on? Because it seems like that. There's this other thing that I was noticing, that when people have UFO experiences, like if they're in their home and they wake up and there's like the room is filling with light, so often they will say, oh, I thought the house was on fire. They'll mention fire. They won't say, oh, it seemed like there was a police helicopter outside, like shining one of those, searchlights, or the neighbor's floodlights came on. It's like, I thought the house was on fire, or it looked like a fire, or a fire in the sky. And I'm like, what is that? That's odd. That does not seem like the go-to thing or word you would use to describe a light that you see. And that bugs me.
Yeah, I last year I talked to an eyewitness, a Pukwudgie eyewitness, who said that after the sighting, it smelled like ozone, and there were a ton of lightning bugs around that he didn't notice before.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's something. I think it's those details. It's that small stuff. But you're now so the red orb, that's worldwide, you're finding.
Yeah. And there's always other creatures spotted in the same area. So I mainly focus on the Bridgewater Triangle, which is southeast Massachusetts. And there's UFO sightings. There's Bigfoot. There are giant snakes. We had a winged humanoid figure that looked like a man, and then all of a sudden sprouted wings and flew straight up into the sky. And that was reported by a police officer. So it's another, kind of high strangeness area.
Right.
So Susy, what do you like? Do you have like your blog is how you communicate with the world?
Yeah, I have the blog and I have a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel has kind of gone a little bit off the rails, to be honest, though. So
Why? Because you're always drunk or something?
No,
She's
that is my place to do what I want to do. So sometimes you have me wandering through a swamp looking at stone walls. Other
Oh.
times you have me and my friends watching Bigfoot videos and laughing at them. So you never know where
that's
you're going to
great.
get.
Listen. Susie is as sober as a judge. You can bet on that.
Well, if you're talking about the judges I know.
Never mind.
But it's certainly
that's
true.
so cool.
It's,
That's I love that. Yeah, and I will tell you, no, I did. Here's the thing about the Mothman Prophecies, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. There is so much. There's so much going on in that book. I mean, and now add Pukwudgies to the list, but from Mothman to Thunderbirds to Tulpas to Men in Black, weird, phone calls from weird entities, poltergeist activity. There's, it's almost, and I remember telling my agent about it when I was sort of like, oh, well, there's this book I read that I'm kind of interested in. And I described it to him. And from then on, he referred to it as my haunted town idea. And I'm like, he's calling it a haunted town. I'm like, oh, because from his agent's mind, you can do a haunted house movie, but this is a haunted town movie. The whole town is haunted. It takes it up a level. So I'm like, yeah, I guess it is a haunted town. And it kind of was, and it kind of is, but I don't know, Steve. I mean, it's still stuff still going on in Point Pleasant, or has it moved on?
It seems to have toned down a bit. People in the TNT area, people will see shadow people and that sort of thing. Did you know that about half the Mothman Prophecies manuscript was cut out when Keel went to publish it?
Yeah, when it was called Year of the Garuda. And
yeah,
did it become Operation
that was his
Trojan
original
Horse?
title, but they cut out half of it. Now, a lot of that's preserved in the Eighth Tower, which is kind of the sequel to the to the Mothman Prophecies. But one thing, back to the movie, you said you struck gold with the cast and so forth. The scenes between Richard Gere and Alan Bates, my God, that's so pivotal in the movie. And the one scene toward the end where Richard Gere's character, he's at his wit's end. He wants to protect these people. He wants to understand what's going on. And Alan Bates' character has been through all this. His life has been destroyed. He wants nothing to do with it. And Richard Gere says, "Didn't you need to know?" And Alan Bates plays it so well. The pause, the way he cocks his head and so forth, and says, "We're not allowed to know."
Yeah.
Yeah, what a great scene.
Okay, so a couple things. So many things. Wait, Alan Bates, brilliant, and I love that, and I love what he did, and I have no complaints. As we say, zero notes, no notes. But when I wrote it, I was like, in a way, that character is Keel. That's future Keel,
right?
So, in my mind, I really wanted like Robert Duvall or Harvey Keitel. I just wanted someone who felt very blue collar, very non-academic, just sort of like a cab driver, just sort of like, look, I've been through it's like the opposite of the guy who's coming to your haunted house. Andy, I'm sorry, but you slap a British accent on someone and suddenly they sound smart.
What can I say?
And I know you've been trading on that for decades.
There you go.
Me personally?
In America, we all think you're smart.
Well,
and frankly, up until Ricky Gervais, I think we were good.
you can keep him. Him and James Corden, you can keep them both, thank you very much.
Right. We got a little David Brent, and we're like, oh, they're just like us. But then they got Alan Bates. I'm like, okay, you went British, that's fine, and it was great. But okay, so Lakeshore calls me up, and they're like, okay, look, we're trying. Richard Gere is the guy we want, and he is currently filming a movie right now for us called The Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts. Gary Marshall's directing, and they're in Baltimore of all places. So pack your bags. Next week, we're going to Baltimore, and we're going to meet with Richard Gere and have a preliminary sort of like hey, so here's kind of, this is before Mark Pellington was on. There was another director named Carl Franklin, great guy, super talented, really nice guy. And it's like, well, let's begin the seduction of Richard Gere, because apparently they told me it takes him years to commit to a movie. Like he just, at that point, you'd have to seduce him for years. So I'm friggin', I don't know, 28 or whatever, 30. I'm, the youngest neophyte in the group, and we all fly to Baltimore. And we meet up with Richard Gere. So here are the two Richard Gere stories of meeting him at that in that weekend. The first is we're in Baltimore. It's not exactly Hollywood. It's not New York. We're at we're all meeting for brunch at a Hilton or something, and we're in like a little conference room, just like a one for 10 people around a round table, and they're gonna serve us breakfast, and we're gonna talk. So we're in Baltimore. And the woman, she's probably 35. She comes in, she's wearing the Hilton costume, whatever it is, and she's taking orders, and she suddenly realizes, what the fuck? That's Richard Gere. So she's like, oh my goodness. So she's going around taking orders, and she takes my order, and then she gets over to Richard, and he's like leaning over the Hilton brunch menu like it's the Dead Sea Scrolls. And he's like, and she kind of comes up to him, and he's like, skip me. And she like takes a step past, and then she turns back and says, well, I would never skip you, Mr. Gere. And everyone at the table is like, oh God, and Richard Gere like takes a beat, puts down the menu, looks up at her, leans back, just pulls her into the biggest hug. Just the most gallant, charming. Everyone just like breathes a sigh of relief, like, oh, thank God. Sweetest moment. He won me over. I'm like, okay, thank you. This is a good guy. And she loved it. This is, I'm sure, a story she's told more than I have in her life. And it was just a beautiful moment. So we have our little meeting, and then it's like, okay, now, so that was preliminary. Now tonight we're all going out to dinner. So now it's, it's night, there's booze. So we're at some restaurant in the Baltimore Harbor, and we're at a, sort of a longish table, again, about 10 people. I'm at one end and Richard Gere is at the other end. So, we're facing each other like, Bond and Blofeld or something. And everyone's talking, and then the script comes up, and then suddenly people are just having like this weird supernatural conversation. And we're talking about the script, and someone turns to me and asks me something, and I'm like, well, that's the whole point of the movie. And I know Gere is like his eyes are on me, but I'm talking like off to the side to somebody else. But I'm basically talking to him. And then I can see, and that's the whole theme of the movie, is that you can search for answers, you can look for answers, but in this world, in this life, we will never get those answers. And in my memory, he like slams his hands down on the table and stands up and says, that's where you're wrong, because I think you can. I'm like, the hell? And then I'm like, oh, right, because the whole Dalai Lama, the Buddhism, and the Godhead, and the Nirvana, and there is a way in his philosophy that you can transcend, and you can have elevated sort of knowledge of the inner workings of the universe. And I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, but not in this movie. So we're clear on that, right? You're playing a character. I didn't say anything, but anyway, as it turns out, luckily, it was just we'd all had too much wine. So anyway, then the movie got made. Whatever.
I must say, one of my favorite lines in the whole movie is said by Alan Bates. It goes, I remember the exact quote. It goes along the lines of, you noticed them, and they noticed that you noticed them. And that was like, that gave me chills when I heard that line. It was the way it was delivered as well. It was just really good. It's just that sense of, you are being watched. They know what's going on. You don't, you're not going to find out, but they're watching you because you saw them.
I think
was
that's true for
super-
everyone except Steve. No one has seemed to notice. Steve has noticed them.
Yeah, we
Right,
hang out
he
all the time.
stands there
you know,
in the
yeah.
fucking museum going, "Hello, anyone want to buy me a beer?"
Look, I'm an ultra terrestrial, just masquerading as human. That's all.
He's one of them. Hello.
Hey Andy, I got to call it out. Mark works with two writers, Ernest Marrero and Louis Clark, and they were on set. I was not on set. I was not part of the actual making of the movie, but they are part of his creative team. And some of the most memorable lines from the movie are theirs, and that's one of them. And it's a line I wish I had written, because that's what I'm so thankful for is that everyone making the movie was making the same movie and was sort of plugged into that same, vein of, yes, it's like, how do we reckon with the inexplicable? And it's a perfect line. I love it. It's just another way in which everything sort of got better. I mean, I talk about it a lot, but there's a scene in the movie that people love. It's a very brief, but it's when Richard Gere is in bed and he's sort of like, thinking about everything he's been through, and he's like, he can't sleep, and he turns over, and as he turns over, his wife,
Right.
his dead wife, is in bed now, and it's just the whole audience just, I mean, everyone jumps. It's a perfect jump scare, not in the script. So in this case, it was one of the producers, Gary Lucchese, who had been seeing cut sequences from the dailies, and he's on set, and like a good producer, he's talking to Mark, and he's like, everything's working. It's all good, but pacing wise, I almost feel like we kind of need a zoom. We need a jolt. And Mark's like, what? And he's like, yeah, we need not like a jump. Like, we don't want a cat jumping out, but we need a cat scare. We need a thing. And it's like, what is our version of a jump scare in Mothman Prophecies? And I think between them, or maybe it was Mark and his and Ernest and Louis, but they were like, well, what about this? And that camera move where it just sort of pushes up over him as he turns and reveals her is so effective. I mean, that's very Mark Pellington, and they came up with it, and that's the sort of thing that if I had been on set, I would have been like, no, don't do it. I wrote this to be a certain way, but here's what I learned. I'm writing a reading experience, but they're making a movie, and they know that they're making a group viewing experience, and that it has to be paced a little differently, and it has to be orchestrated toward that consumption experience, basically. And so when I saw it, I'm like, oh, okay, I get what they're doing. Okay, they were right. Okay, good. Glad they did it, But it's fascinating, and it's a learning experience. And I feel so lucky to have had that opportunity to not only, on the one hand, have the material respected so much, and on the other hand, have it elevated to such a degree. So again, I hit the lottery.
And also at the Mothman Museum, we have a whole wall full of props from the movie that Jeff Wamsley got a hold of, including the illustrations that Deborah Messing's character is supposed to be illustrating. I mean, it's framed and everything, very cool. We even, Richard, have the watch and the chapstick. And it's framed in a little glass.
Well, let me tell you, I've got it too.
Okay. So I don't know if it was the original chapstick from the movie, but it looks good enough.
This is the original.
Is that the original?
I've never used it until now. No, this is just mine.
Okay.
No, but that's the joke. Is that when I wrote that scene, I'm like, okay, so it's got to be something that no one in the world knows. It's got to be like, I know what's in your pocket, and it can't just be car keys. And I'm like, well, in my pocket is going to be chapstick, so I'm just going to have it. And I did this really stupid thing in this script. I had the voice on the phone go cream stick, because I'm like, Well, it won't know what chapstick is. It'll just like be trying to figure it out, but it'll be right, but it'll be off. Because that was my whole take, was that what makes these things scary is that they're trying to act like they get people. Hey everyone. Hi, I'm injured cold. How are you? You know, it's like, you're trying to be human, but it's the uncanny valley. You're terrifying.
Absolutely.
So I was trying to do that, and it didn't sell. And so then they just said chapstick, and I swear to God, chapstick. The only two movies that have correctly used chapstick: Mothman Prophecies and Napoleon Dynamite.
Very good. Now we have to talk a little bit about Gray Barker, because that podcast, you're talking about the flying saucers and the three men, and I have to tell you.
No, they knew too much about.
I'm sorry, that's right. That was Bender's book. That was kind of like very bad, amazing stories, pulp writing. But anyway, of course, Albert Bender was one of the first people that is supposed to have encountered the Men in Black and been silenced, and he folded up his group and so forth. But they knew too much about flying saucers. John Keel, there are several lectures by him that you can find online, and also he was interviewed at the 2003 Mothman Festival, where they unveiled the Mothman statue for the first time. It's very cool because he was covered on CBS Sunday Morning, and you see him standing there in his white suit, and the cover comes off the statue. But okay, where was I going with this? I had a great point. But I know. When he was interviewed, he said the guy who was interviewing him, was kind of into Barker, and he said, Keel said, you have to be very careful with Gray Barker. He said that when he was writing the three men at they knew too much about flying saucers, he got about halfway through being serious, and then he just kind of threw up his hands and started making it up. In fact, one of the guys in there lived in the town I used to live, John Sherwood. He was just a young kid. He wanted to write a book on the UFO flap in Michigan in '66, the swamp gas stuff. And and I guess Gray Barker said, hey, if you pretend to be this person that was silenced by the Men in Black, I'll publish your book. So he said, okay. Then later on in the 90s, he came forward and said, okay, I was a young kid, and it was just a hoax, and so that part of the knew too much about flying saucers is a hoax. So
well, now which guy? I mean, it wasn't Bender, was it?
No, not Bender. It was I don't know. It was supposed to be some kind of a scientist or whatever. I'd have to go through the book and try and figure it out, but I don't know what it was. But anyway, I have to tell you that in 1976. I attended the MUFON Symposium. This is 10 years after the swamp gas fiasco. Dr. Hynek is there, long separated from Project Blue Book, had started the Center for UFO Studies, and he's speaking there, and the name of his talk is Swamp Gas Plus 10 and Counting. So he reflects on those days, the mistakes he made and so forth, and what he was doing presently. But Gray Barker was there. Now, of course, they wouldn't let him speak, but he was there with an armful of his magazines that he was handing out, and the Saucerian, and the cover had Vegetable Man on it attacking somebody. This is typical Barker. So I kind of cornered him. A friend of mine had met him years before at the 1967 Congress of Scientific Ufologists. Get a load of that, at the Commodore Hotel in New York City. It was James Mosley had run that, the editor of Saucer News. Anyway, so I think, oh man, Gray Barker. So I kind of interviewed him. I asked him all kinds of questions, and I asked him about his book, The Silver Bridge, because I didn't have a copy of it, and I had heard that some people were saying, oh, John Keel just ripped off Gray Barker, and I didn't buy it. So I asked him. I said, well, some people said that John Keel kind of borrowed stuff from your book, and he's this super tall guy, long hair. I mean, I only seen photographs of him with very close cropped hair, very thick glasses. And he says, oh, none of us like to get our literary toes stepped on, but I'm sure John Keel wrote his own book. And so it was so cool. I asked him about some of his publications, and John Keel in one of his interviews said that when Barker wrote The Silver Bridge, the chapter in which John Keel is there, he said Barker got it all wrong. So Keel had to rewrite that chapter. So Keel actually wrote part of The Silver Bridge, the chapter that dealt with him. So that's my Gray Barker story.
You know, which is, I mean, and you're the guy who knows because you met him. That's definitely the feeling, the impression that I get of what Gray Barker was. I think he started out briefly being super, super interested. I think, like, if I had to, reconstruct reality, I think that the Bender story was true to a large extent, that
Right.
someone did, or some people did come to him and say, stop it. I mean, I think we've learned enough about, government disinformation to believe that
sure.
that is within, well within the realm of possibility. But here's the weird thing. And again, it's all throughout the history of UFOs. The people who get really into it, you can get a little like drunk on the stuff and you can get a little freaked out, and paranoiacs are made, not born. And then you add to that the gasoline, or I guess in this case, the match of someone in real life coming to you and going, you need to stop it. And man, you'll start spinning and you'll never stop. And I don't think people who are interested in this area are any more psychologically unstable than anyone else. But it is kind of crazy making when you really think about this stuff a lot. I mean, the only thing that my 30 years of psychic research have given to me is the hope that I never experience any of it. And I used to be one of those guys who was like, I want to stay at the haunted hotel and I want to see the thing and hear the EVP. And now I'm like, I don't want any of it.
So you've never had even a little tiny bit of an experience?
I had a little bit of a precognition, like, and not even cool, not even like, no, the blimp is exploding. like literally it was, I dreamed something and the next day it happened. And what happened was a meaningless encounter at work. And I'm like, okay, that happened. And here's the weird thing. It's like one of those things where it's like, well, the completely impossible thing just happened. Okay. It is gone with your life. It's like, what are you going to do? It's these subjective experiences. And man, hats off and respect to anyone who comes forward with this stuff, because it is so subjective and there really is no reward other than just logging in and going, hey, that thing everyone's talking about happened to me too. So add my name to your petition of people who have been taken aboard a craft and, whatever. There's not a lot of reward for it, and there aren't answers. My God, I look at Whitley Strieber. No one has, no greater intellect and abstract thinker has ever. Oh, I love your cat. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Susy's cat right now, and it's
Weird.
His name is Alistair Pauly.
Alistair. Oh my God, you're a hero. Anyway, Whitley Strieber has spent 40 years now doing simultaneously trying to keep a clear head and also figure out the phenomenon. And I don't know. I've read some of his recent stuff and I find it fascinating, but I don't know that he is better for the experience. I got to be honest.
Right. Now, John Keel came to your house and you served him dinner, right?
Yes. My wife, my ex-wife, wife at the time, it was under strict. I'm like, okay, look, he can't, it's got to be low sugar. he's on a low sugar diet. And it's like, okay, well, we'll just keep it simple. We'll make pasta, but we'll use a tomato sauce that doesn't have a lot of sugar. And it was fairly simple, but it was like, oh my God, this guy's coming to my house. It was my, like, literally, you know, Paul McCartney could have shown up and it would not have freaked me out more than Keel is coming to my house. And yeah, he came to the house, and I had little kids at the time, and I'll never forget my son, my little, 2-year-old Spencer, just jumping up and down in his diaper on a chair going, John Keel, John Keel, John Keel, John Keel.
What didn't he ask him some questions about
Oh
yeah, give us an idea.
Oh yeah. Then Owen,
Yes.
Owen came up to Owen, who was like 4 at the time. He's like, Mr. Keel, who would win in a fight between a dog and a bear? And he's like, he's like, my kid's in his underwear leaning against John Keel's knee. And I'm just like, John Keel doesn't have kids. He doesn't have grandkids. Like, this got to be weirder than Bigfoot for him. It's like, there's a Pukwudgie in the house. He was great. Keel was great. He's like, you'd think the bear would have the advantage, but the thing is, if a dog is protecting his master, he'll never stop fighting. And of course, we had dogs. There were dogs wandering around the room as he's telling the story, and it was such a great thing to say to a kid, And I'm like, God, Owen, you're so lucky, and are you taking that into your heart? And of course, Owen being Owen was just like, what about a dog and a shark? And then Keel's like, depends on how well the dog can swim. Can we move this along? Is it bedtime for the kids? Maybe. He was so patient, and he was so great. And of course, it's so funny. I remember it so clearly, and it is part of like what I consider modern history. But it was 1999, maybe 2000. There was no iPhone. I didn't have a video recorder. I should have been documenting this night. I have no photographs. I got nothing. I'm like, literally 5 years later, I could have recorded everything. And it's like I have no pictures of any part of my life before 2008. and now I have 60 million pictures.
Okay, I have to ask. I read somewhere that I think you and Pellington wanted to honor. Now, there were 46 people that died on the bridge that night, but the powers that were wanted to reduce it to something like 12 people dying on the bridge. Was there some kind of a weird negotiation that you know of going back and forth to get to the actual number?
No, I will tell you what happened. Because I have the answer is very there is an answer, and the answer is that when I was writing the script, I purposely updated the time frame. I did not place it in the 60s. I wanted it to be modern day at that time, which was late 90s. And the reason I wanted to do this is that I didn't want it to feel like, oh, this is some weird period piece about back when people believed in UFOs. I wanted to sort of take it out of its literal context and make it more about, this is a movie about how people experience mysterious phenomenon. And this is what they really go through. And I'm using the Point Pleasant and Mothman as a way to illustrate a broader thing. So I'm writing about a snowstorm, but I'm not writing about the snowstorm of 1966 in some town.
Right.
I'm writing about, here's what happens in a snowstorm. Here are the things a person will go through, as it were. When I got to that point, I realized this is not a literal retelling of his book, nor is it a literal retelling of reality. I'm not using those characters. I'm not using the ones whose street, you live on. Mary Hire was never a part of the book. Right. I'm like, I need to make it very clear that while it is based on that, it is not a retelling of real events, because as Keel pointed out, there's still people living in the town who lost loved ones in that tragedy. And I'm like, so weirdly, I now have to write a sort of on-screen crawl coda that misstates the facts intentionally. So I'm like, I can't end this movie and then go 42 people and then realistically recount the people who died. I'm like, that's in a way that's almost more insulting to their memory. So I'm just going to go, here's how many people died in this retelling. If I wrote a movie about Gettysburg, maybe I would not go out of my way to get the exact number. I'd go, it was 12,000 or whatever. But I said, here's how many people died, and the Mothman has been seen then, never again in Point Pleasant, but has been seen other places. Because again, I just wanted to, my point with the movie was this sort of shit happens. Okay. And we're not closing the book on this at the end. It goes on. Weird stuff goes on. And so really the studio totally behind everything I wanted to do. The only thing they did, the only note they had, and I think it was a good one, was they said, in my script, they said, take all the UFO stuff out and take every reference to UFOs out. Because UFOs are things that movies have been made about, and people have a certain belief. When they hear UFO, they immediately slot into an opinion, and we'd rather they not. We'd rather they approach everything that happens in this movie as if it is sort of new stuff that they haven't formed an opinion on. And I thought that was a great idea. And so I went through and took out, I don't think the word UFO, except a character saying, you know, hey, sometimes people see UFOs and now they see Mothman to differentiate. But otherwise, the UFO phenomenon, all the UFO stuff was sort of taken out of the movie.
And if people, you know, the deluxe edition, some of the deleted scenes, you can see where there was an attempt to get more of the book in the movie. The scene where Richard Gere goes into a motel that he didn't plan on going, and all those notes are there. And
Yeah.
the scene where there's no special effects, where they're standing on the ridge and they're seeing the strange lights going through the color spectrum, like Keel talked about in the book. So you know, there was really an attempt to get more of the book. I remember being a little disappointed at first that the classic Keel Men in Black stuff wasn't in it, but you know, they'd already had the silly Men in Black slapstick movie. There's no way, you know, the parallels would have been
Yes.
laughable, unfortunately. If
Yeah,
you had
that's
done
totally
that.
correct. It did sort of, and that stuff would have been difficult to fold in anyway. You know, the deleted scenes were part of the original script that were ultimately, it was like, okay, well, we're cutting for time, and we're just
Right,
gonna,
right.
here are things we're gonna do. But there was a scene that's in the book that I really loved, and I totally get why it was not ever even filmed. But it was a woman in town who has had weird stuff happening in her house. So Keel goes to her house, and it's this friendly old lady. And, you know, you got to picture Betty White, you know, and she's
Yeah.
like, oh, hello. Oh, come in, you know, and she's nervous and making tea and trying to be, you know, welcome the person from the big city of New York into her humble little West Virginia home. And he's like, so what's going on? She's like, well, I don't even know how to explain it. It's ridiculous. And as they're talking, a book flies off the bookshelf and just hits the table. And he looks over, and she's like, would you like more cream? And then the lamp falls over, and then another book flies out and lands. And he's like, and she's like, I can get you, I'm making some scones. Let me go get you some scones. And she's so embarrassed that the poltergeist is acting up in front of the guest. And I just loved it. I'm like, there's something about this that is just so odd. I've never seen it, but a person who's embarrassed by the paranormal phenomenon in their house. And it was just tonally, it just did not fit with anything else. And so one day somewhere, maybe, but yeah, they took that out, but I love that scene.
You know, I talked to a survivor that went down on the Silver Bridge, a truck driver, at the 2017 Remembrance Ceremony. And he was 88 when I talked to him, which means he was 38 when he was crossing the bridge in his semi, hauling material to Michigan. And it described how the bridge went down in like 30 to 40 seconds. He was forced through the passenger window, right arm first, and he went to the bottom of the river. The currents pulled him up, and a tugboat captain saw him and pulled him up out of the water. And so his name was Bill Edmondson, and he's in an article in the Mothman Museum. So that was bizarre. I mean, his experience was much more detailed than that, but you know, wow, and of course in the movie, Richard Gere has a lot of time to try to warn people about the bridge, making it more dramatic and so forth. But in reality, it was like, what, 30 to 40 seconds.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard that story. That's incredible.
Andy, you've been very quiet. Do you have any burning questions before we move on?
To be honest, no. I've been listening very intently to the whole thing. It's absolutely fascinating to talk about a movie that we've all enjoyed, certainly found very interesting. And I was going to say about this whole phenomenon about lights we were talking about a little while ago. That seems to be a very common feature. The initial beginnings of anything paranormal, should we say, begins with anomalous lights, not just orbs as in dust particles getting photographs, but actual light anomalies, and then they begin to transform to other things. And the whole notion, again, Richard was mentioned earlier, the idea that fundamentally we are energy. If you go down the scientific route, quantum theory route, then we are just energy anyway. So these things can be energy manipulation, as well as experiencing things as if they appear to be physical solid objects, and then suddenly start to change and behave in very strange ways that define normal physics. So I find all that sort of absolutely fascinating, certainly.
Yeah, there's a book, I feel like running over and getting it. I forget the author, but it's a book called Light Forms. That sort of, and it's a fairly recent book. So if you go on, bookshop.org or something, you can find it pretty quick. But yeah, it's called Light Forms, and it's I think what we're getting now, and I love it. I think Joshua Cutchins is sort of the main example is the people coming in now and writing about the phenomenon from very unique angles. Just like I'm gonna sort of focus on this. I'm gonna talk about all of it through this one door that no one's walked through yet, which is what made his first book, Trojan Feast, so interesting. It's like, this is just a book of people who have eaten stuff that has been offered to them from supernatural beings. And it's like, whoa, okay. All right, let's go. Okay. And then he was able to do, the Brimstone Deceit, and he's gone on to write. I mean, he's getting into like a Jacques Vallée level or John Keel level of philosophy of this stuff. I haven't even caught up. I've got The Ecology of Souls, and I haven't even cracked it open yet. And I'm like, I gotta get to that.
Have you read his Bigfoot books?
Yes, I read the first one. I don't have the second one. I want the second one. The second one is, Ghost Bigfoot. That's the one I want.
Yeah,
and I believe in Ghost Bigfoot. I'm sorry, and I don't. And here's the thing, because it's fun to talk about. At the parties I go to, I like to ask people, so Ghost Bigfoot or Paws and Claws Bigfoot, and then people just slowly back away. But it's all of it. It's like there's no. I keep discovering that the dividing lines just dissolve. It's all of it. It's Ghost Bigfoot. It's flesh and blood Bigfoot. It's extraterrestrial biological entities, and it is complete, sort of psychic, weird alien ghost. But I think what is so challenging about it is that there is a non-physical aspect to it. And I don't know that there's anything else in our existence that works as a metaphor for that. It's hard for us to go, well, it's not physical in the way that, those other animals are not physical, or this other aspect of our life is non-physical and then physical and then non-physical again. There's no language, and you immediately start sounding non-scientific, and then our debunker friends just sort of shake their head sadly and then go to the magic castle.
The fundamental problem we have is the notion of subject-object relations. My background is in philosophy, so I've done a little bit of research into this, but this notion that we have physical objects and we're subjects in an object world, that they are fundamentally divided between the two, but that's not the case. Our understanding of how physical matter works is based on Newtonian concepts that are still very much in play. But when you get to the quantum level, all that changes. It all becomes fundamentally different. And of course, modern science is trying to bring the two together into a single unified theory. They're just never going to work because they don't work like that. So that's often we get caught up in that whole notion that those are physical things. It's either physical or it's not physical. But there's a third state, somewhere between the two, that we experience phenomena outside of ourselves, but we have to play an integral part in that phenomenon, that experience. That, it's not just happening and we're watching. We're engaged in those experiences, those phenomenal experiences. I've been my background is paranormal ghost investigation. I've been doing that for nearly 40 years. So I've seen all sorts of ghostly phenomena. But I've come to the conclusion that very much that UFOs, ghosts, paranormal, it's all the same thing, just manifesting differently depending on your own interest and background. So you supply ideas, if you like, go into what you're observing, and how you observe these things, how you experience them is dependent upon your own belief system. So that's why I think you can find cultures around the world having different backgrounds, different ideas, different religions, but can have similar kind of experiences, but for them they appear different. We were talking about the Fae earlier on, and sort of fairies, that kind of thing. Obviously over in the UK we've had 1,000 years plus 2,000 years plus these sort of things. And they were always seen as coming from the ground, coming from other places, physical places, like coming out of hills, that kind of thing. Whereas now you have modern phenomena of lights in the sky and UFOs coming down and things coming out of those. So it's always been this notion they've come from some elsewhere place, whether it's from the underground or from spaceships or whatever. There's always been that sense of otherness has come in from outside somewhere. So that's why I find the ultra-terrestrial explanation makes more sense, because it works in all levels of all forms, things like ghosts and UFOs and operators, etc. So I find that very fascinating, that we're still caught in this Cartesian notion of the mind and body being somehow separate from each other, where in actual fact, they're most definitely not. So I'll stop at that point.
I think that's the final cul-de-sac that we get caught in, and because materialism has been the dominant paradigm,
Exactly.
that it sort of, the presumption is that, well, all questions are framed in that way. And if you cannot demonstrate the consistent material aspect of a thing, then it doesn't really exist. Like you can talk about psychology because that is entirely subjective. And so it's like, that's fine. Or you can talk about chemistry, which is entirely material, and that's fine. But when there's something in that middle zone, there really is no language in I think in sort of Western culture. There's nowhere to stand and have that conversation. Now there's other cultures where this sort of phenomenon is very much accepted into a way of life. And, obviously in those places they have doctors and scientists and stuff, but their worldview encompasses other things. And what they're not doing in those cultures is trying to prove it. They've already accepted it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, and no one's upset and no one's pissed off. And it's just like, and we have doctors doing doctor stuff, and we have shaman doing shaman stuff. And we don't have a problem with that. But then in our culture, I think there is a problem. And I don't know if I sometimes I think, it's changing. And I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's okay that it isn't. And I never thought it was okay until I read The Trickster and the Paranormal. And it was the first time someone sort of floated the notion, maybe the skeptics are doing us a favor in a particular way. Maybe we do need a bit of a membrane between us and it. And maybe that's the function. Maybe it's not healthy for human beings to be totally in parlance and communication with these other things. Yeah. Especially not ours, because we don't have we have no way of understanding it. So we're really, stepping off that 13th step and, falling down. So
the Trickster certainly had a presence with John Keel's silent contactees and the way people were being misdirected over all that period of time. But I have to tell you, one of my favorite phrases that John Keel gave us was transmogrifications of energy. I think I should have a bumper sticker made of that.
Steve, aren't you considered a pariah enough at this point without a bumper sticker on your car?
Well, I got a Pug Wedgie sticker with Susy's countenance on it on my car.
I'm like, wait a second. I was noticing that. I'm like, you've got the Puck Wedgie sticker, but then Susy is the Puck Wedgie expert.
Well, she sent me the sticker, kind of a advertising ploy, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that's her.
But it's fading.
Oh, I thought that was you. Oh, it's a Puck Wedgie. I'm sorry. I thought you had a mohawk. I thought that was you in the 80s when you were in your punk band,
Oh, yeah.
Susy and the Puckwudgies.
That would
Yeah,
be a good band name.
That sounds good. Yeah.
No, they'd probably find me more in a Lawrence Welk band or something like that.
Oh, God bless you for the Lawrence Welk reference.
Unfortunately, I have seen Lawrence Welk because my mother was in love with the accordion player guy. I think his name was Myron or Byron or something.
Oh, no.
He used to force us to watch it.
That is amazing because that is, again, the universal experience. I only know Lawrence Welk because that's what my grandfather watched. So we would be waiting, it's like, from 7 to 8 o'clock, he's got to watch his Lawrence Welk.
Yeah,
and we
there
can
you
watch
go.
whatever, Love Boat or whatever.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up now. Richard, I hope you'll come back because
I would love
there's so
to.
much more to talk about. And this has been so much fun.
Yeah.
This has been a total honor. You guys, I love meeting kindred spirits and people who are again, like Susy, sort of finding your own doorway into this and grabbing that end of the yarn and pulling to see what's at the other end.
Yeah,
Andy, I love what you're talking about. I've got to check out some of the books you actually did complete and publish with good thoughts for the mystery novel coming up.
One of these days
And,
I'll get finished.
Gee, I don't know, Steve. I guess I'm going to see you in Point Pleasant in a few months.
Yeah, that's the coming September. That'll be a blast. Yeah.
I can't wait, man.
You're going to be like a rock star there, man. And I'll say, oh yeah,
We're doing rails of coke off some prostitutes. That's how we rock down at the Mothman Festival.
I'll
I'm
edit
just
that bit
gonna
out. I think.
yeah, me and Richard, we go way back, way back.
That's right.
5 or 10 minutes.
We
something
were in
like
Susy and the Puckwudgies, man.
that. Okay, I'm going to do the closeout. Everybody sit tight, and we'll wrap it up. Again, thank you, Richard. The High Strangeness Factor was created by Steve Ward and Andy Mercer and is copyrighted on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I want to thank our fearless leaders here at the network, Iron Ellen Block, Mark Johnson, and Andy Mercer. Also, Andy is producer and composer of the closing theme from his dark ambient music, and Brian Zeller for the opening theme. You can hear all of us from time to time on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files in real time or in the archives on this same network. And I am Steve Ward, your humble host here on the High Strangeness Factor, a displaced Michigander deep in the Ohio Valley, living on the same road that chased two couples in their Chevy down a lonely two-lane in November of 1966. Thank you all for listening. We will see you all again in a fortnight or thereabouts. Take care.